Hey Lee, how are you? All right, cool. We are back to recording. So first, congratulations to everybody for being elected to the TOC. Hopefully the election process was relatively smooth based on what you went through as well as what the broader community went through. That tool is no good, so I'm a strong advocate of switching to the one that we see in use in the Kubernetes community and a couple other communities that just kind of integrates with GitHub-based authentication. So we don't have to do that wonky two-step, like figure out a person's email address, but not put it into GitHub because then it would be exposing information and yada, yada. So I think hopefully we can just shift to a GitHub identity-based scheme there. Cool. So David, you did a good job of tossing 5 agenda items out, and one of them was actually a couple of them with overlap with what I was going to suggest for you all.
Great.
And then I had a couple that were not as important, but a little bit more urgent, if that makes sense. So we do have a summit coming up in about a month, right? So there's a few things that I wanted to make sure that we got lucky. We held the TOC election. I was a little worried we were going to kind of like run further and further. We held it. We got it. Now you exist. There are some roles that I'd like some of you all to play in that, both on a panel as well as if when we get to the TOC chair discussion, if you pick a chair. If not, that's okay too. Just one of you maybe give a keynote for about 10 minutes long at the beginning of day 2. If you remember previous summits last year, actually specifically, we had Yui as the PMC Council chair. Give that day 2, kind of intro keynote. Doesn't have to be super complicated, but I think it's important to do. So that's what's on my mind. I think why don't we actually start with let's start maybe with broader conversation. I just want to, before we roll into any of the specific agenda items, I guess, I want to make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to kind of level set on what the TOC's responsibilities are, and I guess where we got to in the reimagining the way the technical community was going to operate. Thankfully, both Jan and Eric have been involved in that for a while. So maybe we just pause there. Are there any questions about what you're supposed to do, number 1, and number 2, like where we're at with trying to rework governance?
I have a question about TOC responsibilities that I probably could look up, but I just thought I'd ask.
Let's do it.
It seems to me like one of the goals is also going to be to set like technical direction decisions that cross the whole working group, right? Like there's a set of things that are local to working groups, and then there's maybe a set of things like what is the contributor commit process, or what are the roles of the working groups? And so there's like cross, am I right? The TOC is responsible for the cross working group definitions.
Yeah. The way that I think is the simplest model to just keep in your mind is that the work of the technical community, essentially you have ultimate accountability for, number 1. But then the inverse of that is that the whole point of being an open source project, and we're trying to get more, organic contribution occurring, is that as much of that responsibility as possible should just be kind of brought down to the lowest level possible, right? So, when there needs to be coordination, you want that to happen in a way that's efficient. You want it to happen in a way that isn't going to result in this thing that, all of your employers happen to rely on, kind of falling apart, right? So there's a need to balance, those 2 perspectives. So philosophically, right, you need to get as many decisions as possible down into the right hands, the right minds, the right collaborations, but also your job is to make sure that that actually works. Is that fair?
Yep.
Cool.
I think it is, yeah. We should push back as much as possible to other people, or delegate to other people. There's going to be some things we can't.
And-
I think
and there's-
as part of, oh, go ahead, David.
I was going to say there's some things you want to actually be the same across. You could say that every code base gets to decide its own process for making commits, but that would make it very weird to switch code bases, and you would actually want some standardization there.
Yeah, and I think part of that we'll have to work out is the feedback channels for keeping track of or guiding that delegated responsibility down to those lower groups. So to know that, okay, if we're giving the, this working group is being formed, it has this responsibility, then as part of our mandate of being ultimately accountable for that, what information are we going to need to hear from them, or what collaboration are we going to need to have with that working group to make sure that that's still proceeding as we view it being valuable for the community and for the project as a whole.
So one other thing that was that I think is important to just verbalize, because it's hard to wrap your head around. We're using different terms in the governance docs, right? One of those terms is working group, and another term is project. And understanding the difference between the two, I think, is pretty important, right? Because we had the word project previously kind of made sense because you had this team of committers wrapped around it, and it owned some number of code repositories, and that project existed as a thing that kind of had its own backlog, and off it goes. So maybe just drop that definition from your mind for a minute, and instead think about a project is actually something that is it has a name. It's maybe branded, right? Paketo is a good example of that, where it's got its own branding, and it's a released thing that has value kind of in and of itself, right? It's something that we would want to point an end user, not necessarily a contributor or commercializer, right? But you can point end users at these things, and they have some amount of value. There's some way to get started with just that. So that's what we mean by a project, right? It's less about the people, it's more about the assets that they're working on. And so then, like, Cloud Foundry, now then we could kind of split hairs here and say, are we talking about CF for K8s? Are we talking about kubectl? Are we talking about the CF, VM architecture? But let's just keep it simple now. Cloud Foundry is a project. It's kind of the big anchor project, but there's little bits that also are consumed by it and can also be repurposed on their own. And then the working groups is the main people organizational structure that's in place, right? And so, we might say, look, working groups, as one example, the build pack working group, just making that up. It's something we had kind of doodled, right? There's a build pack working group, and it really is responsible for two collections of build packs, right? One of them is Paketo, kind of repurposable, and then the other is just the build packs that really only work in classic Cloud Foundry. So we could create a work group, build packs, and then they have a project that they support. Does that make sense? Okay, that was one of the wonkier things to kind of, wrap all of our heads around. So I wanted to just make sure that was clear for everyone. All right. So any other questions, just kind of at the high level?
It's like I just wanted to add something to that
Yeah.
example, because I guess we actually need input from those people that would work in these working groups for defining those. Because one thing I could imagine having as part of a build pack working group is also working on, for example, a copy to get back to actually have one set of build packs, which is the cloud native ones, and that could be a contribution to that. But if that makes sense, or it doesn't make sense at all to group something like a part of the copy code base as responsibility for a working group that is not copy, I have no clue. Maybe that's completely the wrong thing. So we definitely need these people on board and probably interview them, maybe invite them to meetings with us to discuss what they think actually works. Guiding principles should come from us. Like, why would we do something? What do we want to achieve? And then we have to work with all these people.
I guess it's kind of guiding and coordinating, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
rather than break apart actually, we should not go into this specific example because we have a lot of high-level agenda items, but I'm really excited about talking about these problems.
It's like, I would actually even love to lure the KPAC fogs into the CFF community, but I asked them already on private Slack, and it seems they didn't really consider that, but that would be another asset to put onto that. But anyway, not getting into these details. That's correct.
Cool. All right. So the first item that we should just talk about is the chair. So amongst the 5 TOC members, we need to have a chair at some point. The way to think about the chair role is you're not in charge, right? You're just simply gonna kind of help with the coordination of the meetings going forward. Number 1, and then number 2, your job is to represent the whole TOC and the technical community in the foundation's governing board, which is really, it's all about like the business aspects of the support around the project, right? So it's budget conversations, it's you know, they do kind of get into kind of market and marketing strategy conversations, but that's the role of the chair, right? So it ends up being it's a bit more work, but you don't have an outsized vote, just so we're kind of clear on how that works, right? And we were very careful when we were describing the role, just to make sure it's really clear that like you coordinate what the agenda is going to be, but you don't get like, you know, the gavel to decide exactly what the agenda is going to be. Is that fair enough?
So lots of additional work, not a lot of additional power. I mean, it's like a win-win, right? Everybody's
It's totally a win. Yeah, it's totally a win. So I guess with that ringing endorsement, I would ask if anybody is willing to raise your hand to do it. Everybody's like, wait, more work?
Well,
Eric,
I feel like
you pulled your mic down. Does that mean you're volunteering?
well, I mean, I feel like I would be all right at, you know, the coordination and facilitation aspects of that for sure, just in terms of keeping us organized. One thing David and I had talked about briefly was, you know, maybe we could, you know, I think that the TOC chair is something that could be you know, dropped without any other consequences. So one thing that we could consider is like maybe having some sort of rotating assignment of that as well for like 3 or 6 month periods. So that's one model we could also pursue, where it wouldn't be like, okay, you know, you're TOC chair for your entire term or something like that. We could deliberately decide to rotate it amongst all of us to kind of share that load too. I don't know what if other people would be interested in that, or.
I mean, that sounds like a really sensible approach to go down. So I don't see why not.
I think it's going to be the most work in this first period, right? Like a lot of stuff is going to have to get established here. So I think if nobody else wants it, we should take Eric up on his offer of extended time. However, we're also aware that VMware and Pivotal has dominated the community historically. And so we want to make space for this exciting role that everybody wants. If somebody else wants to give it a try first, I think that's very reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We were actually.
Go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, we were actually thinking that, you know, since your organization doesn't have any other representation on the board, you might also be interesting as kind of a neutral candidate representative for the TOC in those discussions.
It could be an interesting one. One of the things I'll have to check out is around financial side of things in relation to sitting within the government space. So if you give me a chance to check that with people, just in case there's any kind of perceived conflict there.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. That totally makes sense.
All right. So I think it's reasonable then to say some people are thinking about it. You know, Lee, you maybe you could check on that. I like the point that both Eric and David made, that there is a little bit of an optics to this, right? The way external people are going to look at it when we say, hey, this is the TOC chair. Like if it's a non-VMware person, and I love Eric and David very much, but if it's a non-VMware person, it's a stronger signal to community, to go, hey, this really is like this new governance process, and maybe I should re-engage, if people have kind of gotten frustrated maybe a little bit. So I think that's totally fair. Okay, so maybe we punt that 1 week.
Let's definitely have it on the agenda for next Tuesday to try to resolve.
Cool.
Yeah, Chip, I'll probably send you some emails just to get a bit of info from the board side of things during the week.
Sure, no problem. Not a problem. And just really quick for you, Lee, remember that gov.uk is a member, you're an affiliate member, so no financial obligation, and it's also not a one-off for you, right? It's a defined membership tier for government and nonprofit, and so just making sure that you remember that context. So we're not asking for money, and you're not gonna be asked for money.
It is a time investment.
It was more agreeing other people on what they're doing with money.
Yeah, that's fair. Absolutely fair. Okay. All right. So, because I have some urgency, I'm going to throw out a couple of maybe quick hits. So in the summit, right, I talked about someone, maybe the TOC chair, maybe not. I'd love somebody to give a keynote. It'll end up being a really quick turnaround deadline if we punt till next week. I'm okay doing that, and I'm okay, telling our events team, hey, listen, they'll get it to you, but like we just decided. So I guess the question would be, do we want to wait until we decide who the chair is, or is somebody willing to say, I'll just stand up and say I'm here to represent the whole new TOC, and just talk a little bit about, in fact, maybe the process that we're going to go through. I think that might be the best topic to talk about for 10 minutes, right? What's the process we're going through as a community to change the way we operate? I'd actually pick on, David, thank you. I was going to pick on either Jan or Eric, honestly, because you've been involved, right? Both of you have been involved. Or either one of you.
That'd be fair.
To do it?
Yeah, do you have any interest or willingness to do that?
I actually don't even know about the schedule. Like, I abstained all these online conferences, like all of them. I've got
he's saying he's not involved in the conference. So.
They just don't sound very interesting. Yeah. To be frank, it's like the thing that was important on CF summits was what was happening on the floor, not in the I remember a couple of summits where I think I attended one talk or something, and it was really worth it. Like, not the talk, but attending the summit. Yeah. So I don't even know if I've got time for that.
What time zone is the summit in again, Chip? Like, is this a disaster?
It's U.S. Central Time in the morning, U.S. Central Time, because we're trying to hit as much of Europe all the way through to Pacific.
So it would be like 3 or 4 in the afternoon for Jan.
Yeah, and I think
but it's also they're also pre-recorded, right? So this is something that could be recorded, and it actually needs to be recorded and sent in ahead of time. We've learned to, like, there's normally a live Q&A period, but for these kind of opening the event things, there's no Q&A. You just send a recording in, and at the tail end of the talk, I've got a couple of logistics slides. I'll have to have you thank the sponsors and just like a couple of brief things, and then you're done.
Yeah, I just dropped a link in the Zoom chat to the schedule. Chip, you said this is the day 2 keynote?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's it. Is that at 9 a.m. Central Time? So 7 a.m. Pacific. Yeah. Okay, but as you said, that's almost irrelevant when you're producing it for this, because
it's actually entirely irrelevant for the keynote. For the people that are giving the talks, they need to be there for the live Q&A part of it.
So when do you think we need to have slides drafted and the recording actually submitted by?
That's a really great question that I should know the answer to because I'm doing the day one.
Presumably like
Hold
the
on.
Thursday or Friday
I
before.
was like, because you're already finished like for weeks, right?
Yeah,
That's why you
right.
can't remember the deadline.
I haven't even
right?
started. Okay, so the official deadline is Monday the 12th. But like if it was on Tuesday the 13th or Wednesday the 14th, it would be okay. Because normally the keynotes are kind of the last minute bits that we get over. So essentially, if we decide this on the 6th, right, next week, then it'll basically be 5 working days until we got to get a video in. And again, it's like 10 minutes is what we're looking for here, and then couple minutes after that of administrivia that I'll ask you to just kind of tack on.
Yeah, Chip, and you said like covering the new process for tech contributions in the community. It's probably the most relevant and interesting content for that.
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Nobody's jumping up and down. Think about it. Next Tuesday.
Yeah,
Let's
I think
make a decision.
I think I need to check my schedule a little bit to see if I could fit that in.
Sure.
And why don't we can continue async discussion in the TOC channel as well.
Yep.
Jan, maybe we could coordinate on something. Although, I mean, 10 minutes is not a lot of time to split. So maybe probably just having one speaker for that is going to be most practical. It's not like it's even a 30-minute thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just a quick hello, hey, here's the new TOC. Let me explain what this means. Something along those lines.
I guess, introduce all of us, put some faces to names.
Yeah. Sweet. Okay. All right. Those are the things that I cared about that are timely. I was going to ask you to help me with like making the choice about what projects or working groups or initiatives you want to have slotted in for office hours, but let's do that async. I'll just say these are who I think we should do, how many slots we have, and you all can comment on that. So 1, 2, yep, got that. And the last thing I had for you was just in general to see if y'all are willing, and this does not have to be before Summit, but willing as individuals to pop onto a live stream with Ram to just have him kind of do an interview, introduce you. It's just a video thing that we want to do. It's all just community marketing. All right. So Ram will reach out to each one of you.
Yeah.
It should be simple.
We'll have some questions and directions that a conversation might direct to, right? Because I might have to check that with legal, like what I'm allowed to say or whatever. You know that. Anyway,
yes, I know that.
And like actually, even for myself, I'd like to know that up front.
Yeah. We
giving
No
life interview.
problem. No problem. We could do that. Cool. All right. That's all.
Would that be at Summit or?
No, this is after. This is probably going to be after, given that we're only a few weeks out for that. So it's just we've been doing live streams with more technical content, but we're it's just like any Twitch style stream, right? And videos are performing really well. We're getting actually new adopters trying Cloud Foundry based on a bunch of video content, and I think we could also take a crack at get contributors in the same type of way to come in, feel welcomed, want to participate. So we wanted to take a swing like that. Okay, I should actually.
Chip, did you have one other thing about the panel for Summit that was first on your list? I thought. Oh
yeah, right. Thank you. We do have a panel for Summit that we wanted to run. So there's a couple thoughts. The first is that we wanted a community leadership panel, and I would like as many of you as possible to participate. Alex William from the New Stack will host it. Jan, he doesn't stick to scripts. You can talk to Bernd, about how SAP's handled working with him in the past. So it doesn't really matter if I tell you what he's going to talk about, right? Like we feed him ideas. But Alex will talk about whatever he wants to talk about and ask you whatever he wants to ask about. It's just the way it's going to work. So I will, we'll be reaching out to try to coordinate a time where we can get as many of you as possible. The one thing that I'm going to say though is that right now you are all presenting as white men. That's unacceptable from a diversity standpoint for a panel. I actually think it's something that we need to work on for the next election for the TOC. We need more diversity. We got great geographic and employer diversity. We're just missing some of the different types of diversity. So I guess my question would be to all of you: are there any individuals you can think of that would help us more appropriately reflect the diversity of the community, that people that do play a key role? Angela Chin is an example of someone who we've had on these things in the past. I think she's incredibly smart and has a lot of opinions about how things should evolve. But I also don't want to over rely on one person. So I'm fishing for who you think would make sense to invite into that conversation. Don't feel bad if they work for the same employer as you or don't. It doesn't matter, right? It's just community members that are important.
Yeah, Amelia Downs has been incredibly active in the community recently.
Yeah, on the VMware side, maybe also Piali. I know she's been doing a bunch of work on some CAPI tracks in the community, and I think working pretty closely with some of the SAP folks on that as well.
So I work. So Piali is great work. Great work to work with her.
Cool. Yeah. Any other ideas?
I'm sometimes off camera with kids, but I can hear you all and unmute anytime.
No, it's okay. We see the kids popping in and out, David. It's not a problem.
You will need to sign a release though for the recording.
All right, cool. So if somebody has a brilliant idea at some point, just send me an email or send me a direct message. I think both Amelia and Piali are great ideas. So I'll reach out to them as well. Just kind of loop them in and that'll we'll try to get that coordinated. Thank you, Eric, for keeping me on track with my own list of things.
Well, you said they were all urgent, Chip. So
yeah, they are.
They got to take them off. Yeah, it's legit.
Yeah, there's a time bound thing. I didn't say that important. I said urgent. All right. Okay, so at this point, we've got a half hour left, and I would like to fade back and stop talking. This is now your time to begin to get organized. So, but I will say, David, I have resolved item number 5 of your agenda.
Ooh, am I allowed to at channel? Is that what you're saying? Or you resolved it by deciding to not allow me to at channel? It's still unclear what you mean by that.
Well, it was a feature, not a bug, but now it's you have access. You're all workspace admins now.
Oh man.
Thanks, Chip. I had a few things that I posted in the Slack channel as agenda items. I think maybe there's important and urgent to Chip's vocabulary on that. I think what's kind of urgent and important is like, how are we going to decide what the set of working groups are, and when are we going to have that decision by, so that people can kind of move on and start to organize themselves, right? Because right now, people in the community, at least on VMware side, don't know what the future is and don't know what working group they're part of and whether they're going to be a leader or a contributor or just a member. They don't know what's going on. And so the sooner we create that list of groups and finalize it with input, so it can't be instantaneously, right? But the sooner they can move on.
There's a Miro already, right? That you should have, Eric.
Yeah,
we did some sketches on that, on ideas, but we definitely need to talk to those people that would be members of groups, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's still linked on the issue that you or Bernd started. I think you started that, Jan. Maybe even the PR with that initial.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, is
Yeah.
that linked in there? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
So we can dig that up.
To answer to David, I think we should start with that fast and try to finish it fast, but at least get some first things in. So I would suppose that we kind of invite people working in those. So maybe like the current structure is still in place somehow, right? So there are projects with people that are members of those projects, and there are PMs that are kind of like at least candidates for being working group leads. So maybe we should ask those programs to like send in the representatives into like this call, like next week or the week after, and start the discussion around that. And we should probably try to move that offline after a first round of discussion to get feedback from basically everyone who wants to, and not like relying on representatives, something like that. Like, I mean, that's going to be a huge meeting, I guess. Like by at least taking all PMs in, we're, I don't know, already in a size that can't decide anything. But maybe we can get it into a format that can then work in an asynchronous way. Like maybe we should get input from like the default would probably be PMs and anchors. But I'm not sure, like I would actually leave that completely to the projects. They might decide to send different representatives based on lack of time or a particular interest in defining that, or whatever criteria they would apply.
Yeah.
What do you all think?
I think that you're right, Jan, that if we try to get explicit consensus from everyone, then that won't be productive just because of the scale. So I think, yeah, maybe it would make sense to even like async solicit initial thoughts or concerns from those project representatives. Maybe then we could come up with a proposal for working groups based on that and circulate it for comment and feedback with some expectation of like maybe relatively quick deadline for that commentary period. I know that may be tricky as we're moving into vacation season as well, unfortunately. But if we also say like each project should have a representative, it doesn't have to be the project lead or the technical lead for the project.
So it's actually the last PR left. I still put a link in. Into the Zoom chat. So maybe we should just use that pull request. That was like, I started that as kind of a straw man, like how could that look like, to just get a first sketch of what could work. And then I think we had a couple of meetings where we started to look into that and came up with a Miro that is indeed linked in this pull request. And then maybe we use that PR to actually get feedback. I mean, there's a kind of proposal, a list of potential working groups in text. There's a probably different proposal in Miro that we might want to get into text form, and then we can. I think that's easier to comment on with the default GitHub means. So maybe that's one.
Maybe I think this is great. I'm wondering what the TOC could provide is a little bit of a decision or guidance around resolution of working groups. For example, one working group, Cloud Foundry, that is one option, right? Another option is one working group per project. These are extreme options, right? But somebody like, we would like to provide guidance on the resolution of like a reasonable size, or maybe the number of working groups that kind of we imagine makes sense as a rough guideline. Is it 3? Is it 5? Is it 10? I can't quite figure that out. I think there are advantages to having fewer personally, because there's leadership overhead associated with each group. And so we have to look at the level of maturity of where the community is at and try to figure out what resolution of working groups we're suggesting we would like the end result to be.
Yeah, I'd
also
say
one thought on it. If you have less working groups, it means more cooperation between the technical projects. That's something that usually helps. It makes work in the working group harder, but the technical stuff anyway works. I would hope at least a level below and can work in its own.
yeah. Just to add to that, I'd say by not having so many, you're less likely to find that things drop off the radar and become stagnant in quite the same way as we have seen with some projects.
You're concerned about like some, if there's a large working group with a lot of concerns, some of those could just fall off onto the back burner.
Or seemingly at the same time, lots of very small working groups of 3-4 contributors that then you find that the interest gets lost and then it loses momentum.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, getting that balance right is quite a key thing.
So then maybe we're agreeing that we want smaller number than maybe we've had before when it comes to like projects for sure. And so we're looking for what is the smallest number of working groups that reasonably makes sense, because you can't have one Cloud Foundry one, right? Like, like what are the things that really make sense to be in different areas, such that we end up with like, I don't know, 3 to 5 working groups or something like that, 3 to 6, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I think that also just given the breadth of the contributor base at this point, I think that sounds more practical to have like tend towards a smaller number of working groups initially. And that's the great thing about the TOC is that we can also handle the merger or cleavage of those working groups over time, if we in those working groups think that it's necessary.
So then maybe what we're actually asking the community and the project leads for is, help us design a few options for having between 3 to 6 working groups that are reasonably well defined and make sense, but are large enough to be considered quite active and interesting. Thinking in terms of time frame. Like can we pick a deadline that we set for ourselves about when we're going to provide the decision for folks? If I mean, we can always extend it, but can we estimate when we think we might be able to tell everybody the result?
Well, I guess we need to give people time to give us their insights and opinions. What sort of a time period do we think is reasonable for that? A week, 2 weeks? Then we're probably going to
we could shoot for summit, but that would be too aggressive probably for a decision. We could shoot for the end of July. We could also say 6 weeks from now.
Would it be an option?
That's kind of the range of times that makes sense.
Just one idea. Would it be an option to have a sort of an open office hour of the TOC at the summit, where people who are interested in working in these working groups or designing the working groups could participate and start a discussion that could be a bit more interactive and getting the feedback immediately?
You could also use one of these weekly calls, right? Because this is open.
Yes.
We've got Julian from NA9s and Ram joined. So I mean, you could explicitly say, hey, this upcoming meeting is intended to have a discussion about that. I think the office hours might be a little bit too short to have like a whole bunch of opinions come together. So does that make sense?
Then I would probably shoot for having a meeting dedicated to that in 2 weeks and give people time to actually asynchronously already provide feedback. So they have 2 weeks, and there's that deadline where we expect like whoever didn't yet show up asynchronously shows up, and we have next week to do things like TOC chair and maybe other things. So like there's at least that one topic of TOC chair that would already make it a meeting that is not dedicated to let's bootstrap the working group. think. So maybe that's fair. And then I don't know, like from there, how long do we take? Do we need to actually like digest the input and come up with a proposal and align that with those that provided feedback? I mean, we can still misunderstand their feedback and come up with something that where they say, yeah, well, you should listen, not think too much.
Yeah.
So I guess another 2 weeks at least, right?
Yeah, I think at least.
That will be
Six.
practically, it will get the interesting part, because you won't start a working group unless you have somebody who is willing to put time inside to lead the working group, and that's maybe, who knows what the feedback is. So it's difficult to estimate, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Stefan. We can make all the working groups that we want to, but if we don't have the buy-in from the people who are going to staff them, then they're just not going to work.
I'm just thinking about the working group that deals with release integration. You can imagine what is going on there in the future. I don't dare to predict whatever comes out.
Well, maybe we could aim for end of July, early August. I mean, that's already getting to 6 weeks to try to have that working group structure decided and proposed. But the real metrics that maybe we want to measure around that are, do we have people that are going to staff the working groups to actually make them function? Like having at least those lead roles and some approvers penciled in for the membership in those working groups, people that we feel like would be adequately committed to that initial seating.
Getting this explicit about dates, I'll have to add that like from end of July, there's a 3 weeks vacation on my side. So if it gets into August, then it's going to be end of August, something like that. But anyway.
Yeah. So
yeah,
so
I
given
think the buy-in is the most important thing. Like doesn't work without.
it sounds like we're going to communicate shortly that we would like to have a session, an interactive session about this 2 weeks from today. In the meantime, give us feedback about, possible options for working groups such that they're reasonably large and reasonably well divided, and submit proposals or comment on existing proposals, so on, and then come talk to us interactively. Sorry, my kids are like yelling at each other in a very cute way. Okay, that sounds good. Why don't we try to have it decided by the end of July, since a lot of people there's some VMware vacation at the very beginning of August too, that's kind of like group wide, which is going to affect this. So I think if we can try to have this decided by the end of July, a lot of people are going to disappear for a little bit after that.
And also, your choices are not permanent. They can change
Right,
a
we
week
just need
later if it
clarity.
isn't working. Exactly.
We got to give people clarity so they can move on and know the new structure.
Yep.
Well, it seems like an async thing we could do right now is to solicit those representatives from the current project leads to at least make them aware that this process is happening, and get that meeting 2 weeks from today on their schedules, kind of get that responsibility of participation in that assigned, whether it's the current project lead or someone they want to delegate to.
I guess we should. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I was going to say, have we got a handy contact list of those current project leads and contacts?
Yeah, somewhere. I have to dig it up.
Yeah, because that's probably the first starting point, knowing who to talk to first of all.
I'll dig it up and drop it in the Slack channel for everybody. At least the best one that we've got. The community has been doing a lot of organic shifting underneath. So. All right, so I'll get that to you post meeting or during. All right. So what else is on your agenda?
Let's see. We got to figure out how to ship this Bionic thing as the default Cloud Foundry supported tested thing. That was my fire, this is urgent, though not incredibly important. But there's a bit of a gap right now. Do we know what's going on next? What is it going to take to make Cloud Foundry default to Bionic and feel supported and validated and tested?
So, I mean, for GovUK powers, we are running pretty much all on Bionic, apart from the autoscaler. That's the only bit that isn't, and we've not had any issues, actually. I even helped ATNF with their upgrade. So that's run nice and smoothly for us.
I would say same for SAP. We run everything on Bionic.
And if you want to reference any of the GovUK PAS stuff, it's all in the open, conveniently, over at AlphaGov.
What do you think the differential is between how you approach that and what kind of the default CF deployment looks like? Because I think that's what David's talking about is as an open source consumer of Cloud Foundry, when I install it, I would like to have Bionic be the thing.
I think the underlying question is not Bionic or Xenial or whatever, right? The underlying question is who takes care that CF deployment is regularly released? That's the real question. So let's not talk around it.
Right. Yeah, fair. And the first order of business for the maintainers of CF deployment is when are we going to make Bionic the default thing, right? And how are we going to validate it? How are we going to get this community-owned concourse to be validating that CF deployment is in fact working correctly on Bionic, which is kind of the gap in my mind. If we could close that gap and have green builds running in the open, then it's a relatively easy option to just change over, right? Change the default stem cell. The problem is really that we don't have that work done yet. Is anybody interested in doing that work? Is anybody on the other vendor side planning to take on that setting up? Because we're just trying to sequence our engineers' time to come help with that effort, but we haven't gotten anything in that channel yet.
So I'm not aware of such activities from the SAP side. I mean, we took over the Bionic stem cell building and generation. So we hope that, let's say, also other contributors can kick in here.
Sorry, just dealing with the kids in the background. Okay, so it sounds like we don't have anybody willing to sort of do this work. I've got Dave Walter ready, but if we can find a vendor who's willing to collaborate here on switching over, we can have a better community story, right? And then we'll also solve this problem with the working groups, right? For where CF deployment and the distribution challenges land.
I mean, the way is absolutely right to put the concourse and the projects, everything into the community-owned procedure. That makes definitely sense. But yeah, it then boils down who is leading this working group and which, is there a team behind it? Because if there's no team behind it, then this one is dead pretty soon.
Are there any
right,
other impediments to actually getting those pipelines up and running at this point? Or is the infrastructure all ready and we just need to find the right people who are going to be available and committed to maintaining it?
I mean, it's not just CF deployment, right? There are tons of dependencies. Who's responsible for cuts? Who's responsible for smoke tests? Who's responsible for Bosch backup and restore? And you name it. There are so many projects, just Windows cells. what's that? I doubt that you find anybody who just has this oversight for this project. So the best thing I could imagine is that it ends up in some collaborative working mode, but from organizational point of view, that's the most challenging setup. And at the end of the day, at CF deployment, at least for the Bosch-based path, that's where it gets decided whether that's a delivery channel, right? Whatever happens in any other project is completely uninteresting as long as it doesn't get released via CF deployment. That's at least my point of view.
But yeah, it does sound like that is going to be one of the like a significant responsibility of some working group. So it would ultimately fall to those people. So all right. I mean, maybe in the interim, you know, given that it's going to take at least a month or so for us to finish and roll out the working group structure, we can continue this as, you know, an ad hoc, more urgent matter to resolve for the community, because, you know, that the xenial stem cell default is just going to get more and more stale over time and be less relevant and even less secure for the community. Okay, well, let's see what we can do also to coordinate async on this, but we might want to keep trying to push this forward in subsequent meetings, given their level of urgency.
Do you have any idea how we could get a buy-in from, let's say, important enough companies to support? I mean, whatever we decide from technical oversight point of view, it's nice, but yeah, not enough, I would say. You need buy-in and the willingness of companies to really support here, and that's a critical thing. And at the moment, I have the feeling everybody is playing, in German, there's a special word for that, Beamten Mikado, don't know, it's untranslatable for me. I'm not good enough in English. Everybody is waiting that somebody else moves. That's the translation.
Yeah, everyone's
and, we have to
for the
get over
first
that.
mover.
And I don't know if the TOC is the right here, or if we need help from the governance board or whatever, but to get that one moving, or
I think
with the initial friction done, everything else will then follow. And it's not a technical problem that this needs to be solved. I mean, there's enough. Might be complex. If you look at the pipelines of CF deployment, that's a lot of fun, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is
I mean, us as a technical oversight committee deciding on something like that doesn't change a thing, like because you need the workforce actually doing some stuff. But also, I'd say there's nobody hindering us to start with announcing a single working group right now and say, let's see how we get that staff, and delay the rest of that structure to a little later. Like, we don't have to wait 4 weeks until we then say, yeah, well, and by the way, there's a big problem. There's no staffing for this working group that we really think should be there. So we could immediately start seeing how such a working group could be established. I mean, it's pretty clear that for the Bosch-based CF delivery, that's the current community delivery channel, this has to be part of a working group, right? That's already clear.
And also, we could start it smaller than we maybe think it's going to be, as in, what are the things for sure we would group together? Maybe it's cats and CF deployment, right? And like anything else is maybe contentious, like it could go somewhere else, but we could say those two things are these collective distribution and validation, community-owned artifacts. Let's put them in a working group. VMware wants to have people on that working group, like we will contribute in that area. Hopefully other vendors will contribute in that area, maybe even get some leads in that area. And then we know who's going to do the bionic validation and you know, committing.
Actually, I like that idea. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say part of it actually is looking at it and chunking up the work streams in such a way that it makes it easily accessible for people. And look at tagging things suitable for first-time committers to the project, try and get new blood in that way, rather than looking for a large entity that's going to take on a big package of work.
I mean, this getting accessible to the community, that's something that is actually, something which can be improved a lot. So we as a team now at SAP, we are trying to contribute to the cloud controller since quite some time, and it's really not easy. That's all I can say. And there are so many, it's not because of the people, or I don't want to blame anybody. We get good support, but just how to open a PR with a space supporter role, how the project is managed in the beginning. It was a lot, it's moving in the right direction, but I think we can do better. And get more approachable, and
Julian.
Yes, hello. I'm just a guest, so please tell me if I'm somehow disturbing the conversation. But I was wondering for a while now how, from the external view, it appears that a lot of larger corporates, they pull back from the foundation and the community. And I was wondering how work capacity evolves over time in terms of contribution so that the project remains stable. It's one of the reasons I dialed in today. And I was also wondering, is it going to be the right time for a small organization to offer some help? Although the magnitude we can contribute is naturally smaller than it may be necessary. But especially the question about the process and how it looks like, and what's the minimum contribution an organization should be able to give. That would be something that really catches my attention.
Yeah, Julian, I think I can speak to some of your questions about, like, one, is this the right time for smaller organizations, and what is that minimum? Because this is something that we'd been talking about a lot in rethinking the governance. I think generally speaking, we want there to be a much lower barrier to entry for any organization that wants to contribute. That's what we've been working out in the new role definitions for the working groups. I don't know if you've looked at the community repository in the Cloud Foundry GitHub org, but I'll drop a link in once I pull it up to the roles document that's setting those expectations across what the working groups would be. But even there, it's not just like the previous model where there were those more cohesive teams around projects that required a lot more commitment. This is intended to be much closer to other communities that have allowed maybe some expectations of regular contributions from anyone who has authority within a working group. But in general, the intent would be to make it a lot easier for individuals even to have much more of a part-time dedication to any of the projects.
That's a good point. So just to give you some food for thought, in my organization, we've historically been a Ruby on Rails shop. So we have a large fraction of Rails developers. We do data service automation. There are people who use Bosch like quite a lot. And we do have the operations department, which is, let's say, trained in taking Cloud Foundry releases and shipping them to enterprise customers. So let's say there are different specialization in those teams. And I think if we take a work capacity, let's say a number of hours that my organization could contribute, it could be, well, let's say, there could be an affinity of certain people in certain groups within our company to certain projects, not to all of them, but to some of them, and finding out what's the best way to organize that. Find people who are willing to do that, maybe invest some spare time in addition to the time we will give, and so to make that rewarding for both ends. That'll be the challenge I see. Thanks for listening. And if at some point there will be communication towards like how this could be done, or that if they're more, well, if you want to talk to an organization who's willing to do that, well, count me in, because that's basically, there is some willingness to do so, as long as it works out with our day-to-day business. We'd be happy to contribute something finally. Well, we did in the early days, but
yeah. Julian, this is the forum, right? So if you can come next week, or at least have somebody come next week, that's how you can keep the pulse on, like, oh, look, it looks like now there's going to be a swarm of activity as we try to solve this new stem cell line. How do we percolate that through all the projects, right? I mean, this is the I would say the key place. And then individual contributors, as these work groups pop up, they need to just dive in if it's an area of interest, right? So as CAPI kind of cleans up its engagement model, that's all Ruby code. We'd love to have your Ruby experts show up and even just help clean the code base. Who knows? All kinds of good stuff there.
Well, because that's something interesting. I mean, from my experience for example, in earlier research projects, there must be some alignment with the goals that the teams have anyway. So, for example, if I was to look for somebody volunteering to take on, like, say, a whole project within the CF Foundation, that'll be hard. So onboarding a new problem that they haven't had before, that I think will be harder to sell than, for example, so if we reverse the perspective for a second and ask, what's the fear of anions, for example, to happen with Cloud Foundry, I think there's some momentum. For example, what happens if Bosch dies away? It's just be deprecated, and there will be no security patches anymore. And that's the kind of area where companies like mine will be much more willing to contribute than, for example, to take responsibility on a chair, or like onboard more additional org work, which we as a mid-sized company struggle to do anyway, because we have too many engineers and they don't want to do these things.
Makes sense.
I mean, I second that definitely, because that's also how my team got into the community. So we run a special type of CF deployments, Bosch-based, with very large installations, and we saw that the cloud controller simply has some gaps here and there. And that's how we slowly got in, and we have seen some slow requests in our installations that may not pop up in smaller installations, and then one commit or one PR after the other comes in, and that's how it started. It also didn't start from we want to put something or generically lead something, but it's concrete problems. And
yeah, that makes sense to me too. So we have basically new groups digging into Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry for Kubernetes. We are training up new engineers, writing operators and stuff, because porting data sets and so on. So it's not only about Bosch-based Cloud Foundry, but it's definitely where our money comes from, and therefore there will be an area of interest. So maybe if areas show up where participation would be necessary, feel free to ping me at any time. I'll try to contribute more to these calls. But I'm new to this, although I've been in the community for very long. I don't know really how to play or interact with the foundation very well. I have to admit, that's on me.
Great. That's great to know. I think essentially what we're kind of trying to figure out is imagine a set of working groups, all of the different vendors that might be involved, what roles do they want to play in those groups? Like, what I hear from Julian is like, I want some members in a few areas, and I'm happy to help in areas that are strategic to me, which is true for everybody, right? It's just the level of role that we might want to take in different areas. And you kind of like merge those requests all together, and you identify areas that are underfunded by everybody. And then Chip or the TOC says, hey, team, we really need people to step up in this area, even though it's not 100% strategic because we don't have enough contribution in that area. So you might even want to restructure the working groups based on who's interested in contributing in various areas. So like we kind of need to collect that information and then play various scenarios in order to figure out what structures make sense and who's going to play which part in what thing.
Yeah.
We'll brainstorm some ideas about ways we can collect that information, some information theory stuff maybe, and try to figure out how to make that viable. I think we are over time, and I got to get my kids to school. As you can hear, it's a disaster over here.
Yep.
But so I think we should call it.
Good deal.
Okay.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Same time next week. I'll post this on or have this posted up on YouTube so we can share it. And I'm assuming somebody's going to take the action, one of the TOC members, to communicate with the rest of the community about this meeting 2 weeks time. We're going to talk about working groups, and you want them to come, right? All right. I will share the project lead list that we've got, which is as up to date as I can tell you it is.
Awesome. Thank you
All right.
very much, all.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
See you. Bye.